All right. Hi, Robert. So, how are you
Hi,
doing?
Julia. Good,
You're
good. How are you?
good. Sort of trying to walk off a cold. Um,
Hope it works.
Thanks. Yeah, me too.
Hmm.
I'm sure it will. At some point, it will work, regardless of what the cause is.
Yeah,
But um, so I just wanted to go through, you've read the first installment, that basically the introduction that I wrote about Lace, and
yes.
you gave some comments about that. I would love to do a deep dive on whatever aspect of the five values we talked about: wisdom, openness, resilience, love, diversity. Whichever of those you'd like to dive into, and maybe multiple, but like, what would you like to start with? And I'm going to include a link to who you are, so you don't have to introduce your amazing badassery. But there is amazing badassery here with Robert
Yep.
Moir.
Thank you.
And,
Appreciate that.
and pronounce your name correctly for me, make again.
Yeah, Moir.
Moir.
I
I
think you
did
said
it,
it
sort
right.
of.
Yeah,
Getting better.
yeah.
So yeah, what is your passion? Or do you want to start right out with your story about
Um,
what brought you to Lace? That might be a way
we
to,
could
what
start
shows up
there.
for you?
The other, well, wisdom is the one that springs to mind. Uh, I'm trying to locate the draft so that I have that as a reference.
Yeah. Do you want me to put it in the chat window?
I think I found it.
Okay, good.
But yeah, sure, I can talk about how I got into this. I spent a long time working in academia on a very multidisciplinary project that's still there in my mind. I think I might come back to it one day, um, but it wasn't really feasible to pursue that for me in the academic context. That caused me to leave academia, and then I ended up sort of in this transition from academia to industry, working on a project with Tufi Saliba. And the project is ER64, which is this highly decentralized data structure. You think of it, it's kind of like a portable blockchain. And it fits into this puzzle because uh, essentially because of Hypercycle. You can think of it that way. So Hypercycle is this company that is building basic network infrastructure for the forthcoming AI internet. So the first internet was the internet of people. So bringing people together. This is now allowing AI to connect to AI. To do that, you need to have secure, super efficient, very cheap uh, transactions between that are peer to peer that don't have an intermediary. So you don't have to wait for some kind of uh, settlement process to happen in order to perform a transaction. You can actually it's like sending cash over the internet. And ER64 plays that role in the context of Hypercycle. And there's a larger story that predates me, involved with Tiffy Saliba and Dan Tolliver, who developed the co-authors of what's variously referred to as TOTA protocol, or TOTA protocols. Um, and it covers different aspects of how you solve that problem to allow peer-to-peer transactions on the internet without an intermediary.
Just the
In
financial transactions you're talking about, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, any transaction where you require some form of value exchange. It doesn't need to be sort of financial in the usual sense necessarily. It could be some other kind of trade, but it does have to involve a trade of digital assets, or a digital asset for work, or something like that.
So a digital asset could be data to train an AI,
Sure, could
right?
be.
Or a result from a AI computation.
Yes.
but it's being exchanged for something else of value, whether that's fiat or other data.
Yeah. I mean, in this context, it is a an arrangement where one party is making a request to another party for some kind of work and is paying for that work in some kind of currency. So it could be uh, cryptocurrency, it could be some other kind of digital currency, but it could also be a digital representation of fiat itself. So not like an alternative currency, but actually US dollars that you're paying for. But it's just, you have a way of doing that using a digital, like purely digital peer-to-peer transaction mechanism.
So then that is what Earth 64 allows Hypercycle to integrate. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, so there's layers to the technology. So certain pieces of that are covered by TOTA itself. But there's two key pieces that Earth 64 adds to the equation. There's some others, but the two sort of key ones are maybe I'll just focus on one of them for now. Like the capacity that Earth 64 the data structure has, essentially it's this, enormous binary tree. And each node in that binary tree you could think of as a digital asset, but it also is a container of other digital assets. So and the metaphor we're using right now, Tufi's metaphor, is sort of like a UPS truck. So the UPS truck has some value, like it's a vehicle that costs money, and but it's used to transport other goods that have value.
Right, and it takes resources to run it,
Right.
but at the same time, it's actual the sort of uber or emergent value is the transportation of resources.
Yeah. So it can be used, like, so in principle, you could pay for something in UPS trucks. But usually what you want to do is you get the UPS truck back, but the goods in it are transmitted from one party to another.
Right.
And
So, oh, sorry, go
that,
ahead.
well, that's something you can do with the R64 data structure. So the nodes are called SATO servers. So these SATO servers are containers of value as well as something that has value itself.
And what is Hypercycle? How does this integrate into Hypercycle? And then what does Hypercycle have to do with LightRoot? And we can go back and forth on all
Yeah.
this because I know we're working this out, but
So yeah. So this is trying to capture, I guess, answer multiple questions at once. So my entry into this is through R64. But there's a suite of technologies that are coming together for basically to meet the use case that Hypercycle is focusing on, which is this network connectivity for AI agents. So machine-to-machine transactions that are peer-to-peer. Peer-to-peer is important for a variety of reasons. Like one of those is the cost of transactions. So by taking out a third party in the middle of the transaction, you make that extremely efficient, both in terms of time and in terms of cost. So the cost one is what I was just sort of focusing on, because you don't have to pay the intermediary. You're actually just paying for the service that you're transacting on. But also because you don't have to wait or talk to an intermediary to do the transaction itself, that transaction can be extremely inefficient in terms of time, which is very important for AI agents that are wanting to transact with each other. They need responses from each other as quickly as possible, because you're having to transact over a network. You don't, when it's not like you're just running this in a supercomputing facility where you can do all the computation essentially locally. You have to, go out to the internet to do that. So the latency of transactions is a major bottleneck. So the faster you can resolve a transaction, the more functional the system is going to be as a result.
Right. So hypercycle gets its name not from hype cycle, but from very, very fast cycles.
Yeah, and the cycle itself is this term that comes from Toda. So and there's two aspects of Toda, one of which they sort of both part of the same original notion and protocol that Tufi and Dan came up with. One is on the Toda IP side, which is, you can think of it, it's a communications protocol for secure transactions or secure records of events on the internet. And sorry, I'm just
Well, so we can link to the primer on Toda for people who are super interested in that. Let's keep this at a high level.
okay, sure.
Yeah, because we want to
Well,
get to the wisdom piece,
right.
right?
Well,
And so, go ahead.
yeah, just so I'm bringing that in, I guess, to sorry, my mind is blanking right now for some
It's
reason.
okay because we can. When your mind blanks, it just tells you to go somewhere else, right? And then
Yeah, exactly.
it'll show up if it wants to show up. So that's good. So in terms of what LightRoot is doing, we are creating a public sector interface for what Hypercycle and some other peer-to-peer decentralized organizations are trying to do, which is to build this lightweight AI computing ecosystem, or LACE. So given your involvement, you're the chief scientific officer for LightRoot, right? So far. And it seems pretty exciting to have you on board.
Oh, thank you.
And the question is, how do you see LightRoot in particular driving home the wisdom piece, or what questions do you have about that? Like, you and I had talked briefly about some nuances to wisdom,
Right.
and maybe we could go on a deep dive there.
Yeah. So, I mean, well, okay. I guess just to continue the thought before, and then to weave into the wisdom piece. The technology that's enabling this, extremely fast transactions is not just their 64, it's also the Toda protocol. So I'll leave the details of that and just talk about it at a high level as you suggest. So that is connected to hypercycle, because hypercycle is made possible because of the innovations coming from Toda. And so the Toda tech to make this peer-to-peer transaction system possible is being sort of unfolded as hypercycle itself unfolds. So the initial version of LACE, which is this lightweight AI computing ecosystem, part of the lightweight part is taking out intermediaries in transactions. So the same kind of peer-to-peer ability to transact peer-to-peer and have super efficient. Basically, you could think of it as function calls. Like, so if an AI system or process can't solve some problem locally, it needs to call out to the AI internet and have some other AI module or agent produce that answer for them or solve that problem for them. So naturally, you want that to happen as fast as possible. So the part of the lightweight part is the low cost, but also this low latency connectivity. So the initial version of that for the sort of broader world is going to come out through hypercycle, which is why hypercycle plays this sort of key role. It's the sort of first mover in this kind of ecosystem on the network front. Where LightRoot comes into that is looking to connect data centers that don't, basically they connect to the internet through a gateway. So they have large amounts of traffic going through that gateway. They don't have the ability to have each compute node in their data center connecting directly to the internet. So there needs to be a way of solving that problem of how to allow a data center to call out to the internet in this way and have it be efficient, secure, inexpensive, and all the other sort of key features. So that's the relationship.
Well, I'd like to add also, aside from HPC centers, we want to create an interface to lace just from people's iPhones who are in the federal government, right? I mean,
Sure.
that's more recent.
Sure.
The original
Yeah.
instantiation of LightRoot,
Right.
but we have evolved.
Indeed. No, and there's, loads of other possible directions this could go. It's expanding out, I guess. I mean, we want to have everybody connected to this eventually, right? So it's a case of sorting out what are the key bottlenecks that need to be addressed at each point in time and addressing them one by one, and facilitating this connectivity over time. But then there's the other piece that we're leading into is like, okay, well, what are we doing all this for? And what values are governing the process by which this technology is being unfolded, which is an extremely important conversation to have. And
Especially for a decentralized system, right?
for sure. Well, I mean, I think actually for our sort of global society in general, that this is a conversation we need to be having more about what values are governing anything we're doing as a sort of collective of beings on this planet,
Amen.
And
Exactly. And maybe
so
this could allow us to have that conversation in a way, kind of force the conversation.
yeah, well, as you say, like the decentralized technology brings that into the fore because sort of the other side of the coin with decentralized technology is decentralized governance. So there's this very hard problem that will be, figuring out better and better ways to solve over time how you do that. But that comes into problems of, collective choice, collective action. And when you have large groups of people involved in a governance process, you have conflicts of values. So you have to have, I mean, it's well known in the philosophical context that any sort of debate ends up either leading into some kind of agreement or some conflict of values, typically. And values are hard to rationalize a lot of the time. There are ways of doing that, but it's a difficult process because values tend to attach to people's identity at a deep level. So criticizing someone's values feels like a criticism of their identity. So you need to have a way of having open conversations about really important issues that don't descend into a pure sort of, well, we have different values, so we can't continue the discussion anymore,
Right, we're at a stalemate because otherwise we're attacking each other's identities. So
Right.
it requires this kind of emotional maturity, which I think actually can be supported by decentralization generally. The sort of understanding that the whole, I really like this e pluribus unum idea, that the whole is created from all these unique parts. And it's okay, in fact, desirable for them to be unique because otherwise you don't need decentralization. If all of the nodes are the same,
Right.
you might have
Right.
you just have a centralized system, right? So decentralization actually supports uniqueness and competition and collaboration, which is very much like the human brain. So anyway, don't get me started, but
That's good. It's good. I like it.
we're yeah, how would you, let's talk about wisdom in the system.
Sure. So I think in the comment to what you wrote, I was just reflecting. I don't remember where I got this from. Something I read recently had presented wisdom as like in contrast to knowledge. as wisdom is knowing what to do with knowledge. And so there's an implicit value element to that. Like the knowing what to do has this sort of this tinge of value to it, because what to do is kind of implying like what's right to do in some sense, but then
Right,
right
like what
according
should you do? What is the should, right?
right, yeah. So according to whose values, and in what context, what are you trying to achieve? So if you can reduce things to the level of knowing what you want to achieve, then there's something more rational there. But choosing what you want to achieve is very much a values question. So I think there are interesting ways in which you can structure a system to function better and better according to some particular value, like some particular, like we know that when we introduce not what's the term I'm looking for?
Proof of computation? No.
No, well, like in any case where you have
Oh, constraint?
well, constraint was the word in my mind, but it's more utility is
Mm.
the general notion, but like where you have some metric according
Yeah,
to which the performance of a system is measured.
right.
It's relatively easy to game or on the optimization of that metric at the expense of other things. Um, so that's not the kind of approach that uh, tends to lead in the right kinds of directions, perhaps because of the fact that particularly when we're talking about systems of human beings, is like some of the most important things that we would like to measure are very hard to measure, like well-being and sort of thriving or flourishing or whatever that is. Like how do you measure that, right? It's a
Okay, but
very
wait, we're gonna have a little bit of a little discussion about this because I just had a discussion with an economist on that NASA podcast
Mhm.
about this, and he's like, "Well, how do you measure it?" And it's like they're like 100 years behind. Like the world of psychology and psychophysics has been measuring people's internal states in ways that are relatively accurate for like 100 years.
Hmm.
But it's because there's this belief that all we can measure are things that are outside and that we can't trust people. But
Right.
what it turns out is you can trust people to report on their internal states if they're motivated by the right incentives.
Hmm.
Right? In other words, if you use incentives that internally motivate them to be honest, then they're honest about their internal state.
Right. And yeah, no, that's nice. This gets to one aspect of what I was meaning to get into, in the fact that more and more we find that we can solve complex problems by introducing the right incentives into a system and relying on game theoretic mechanics or game theoretic like mechanics to drive behavior in directions that are beneficial for the whole. Uh, and this is part of the strategy that Hypercycle is using. And I know these kinds of ideas are being implemented at a policy level in various places, as well as there's a greater recognition that it's a very effective way of dealing with enormous complexity, whilst still allowing some sort of simple model to be used to drive behavior in beneficial directions. So
Yeah, and so what comes up is, sorry, please don't answer this question if it interrupts your train of thought. And at the same time, it came up for me, so I'm going to ask it.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
some people might be concerned that a particular AI node or multiple aren't going to play according to what is predicted by game theoretic rules, right? Because they're AIs and they're not humans.
Yeah, well, okay, so this gets into essentially how you design a reputation system to drive the right behavior in a context of AI agents. So yes, they won't be motivated by the same things that humans are motivated by. But at least for now, these agents are being run by human beings, and the fundamental profit motive is there for anyone who's running one of these nodes, because you're paying for the hardware, or whatever group is involved is paying for the hardware, is paying for the space to run it, the electricity to run it, the licenses to run it, the whatever financial backing is needed, as well as paying for the AI software. Like somebody needs to get paid for that. So all of that investment is being used because it's expected that this node will make money. So if this node is not a good, for lack of a better word, citizen in this context, its reputation will go down, and so it will make less money. So there, even from that point of view, I think that I mean, it's not like that's the only thing that matters from a reputation point of view, because again, there'll be sort of systems of systems and different communities that evolve within this, and they can each use different data to assess different aspects of reputation that are relevant to that sub community, right? So this can happen in a kind of organic way, that different communities, different markets care about different things, and so they're using different rather than thinking about it in terms of metrics, but thinking about it in terms of what data is being used to establish what actually happened. And so from that, you can determine whether this node is reputable or not. You can prove it's reputable or prove that it's not reputable.
A
Because,
reputation for truth or accuracy.
yeah, because you have a cryptographic record of its behavior. And, it's just one of the things that Toad IP will be used for in the system.
So do you think from truth, I mean, this is very philosophical, and luckily you have a PhD in philosophy as well as a PhD in math, but do you think that from truth can come wisdom?
Uh, that's a very hard question to answer in general. I mean, they're definitely very deeply related. I mean, one of the sort of standard definitions in philosophy, without getting into all of the sort of edge cases, defines knowledge as justified true belief. So truth is part of the definition of knowledge. And if if wisdom is knowing what to do with knowledge, then it's wrapped up in that. But it also comes through, I think, because wisdom generally comes from experience. It doesn't come from something that you read or learn about from somebody else. Like it has to do, to me, it has to do with this interplay of knowledge and experience. And it's something that evolves over time and develops and
Is
becomes
intuition in
richer.
there?
Yeah, I think so, because, well, again, to me, intuition plays a absolutely crucial role in basically everything that we do. We just don't notice it. And then if someone asks us why we behaved in the way that we do, we come up with some rationalization of it. But it's intuitive behavior that's driving, almost everything that we do.
So that statement that you just made makes me want to add an addition onto the definition of wisdom. So wisdom isn't just, I don't think, knowing what to do with knowledge, but it's knowing what to do with knowledge in a context of self-awareness, or just, let's say, awareness, like contextual awareness, because those who are aware that most of their rationalizations or all of their rationalizations are indeed rationalizations, and that in fact they have an intuitive faculty that's driving them, end up being thought of as more wise, right? There's this awareness of, it's like an awareness of the fragility of the story of the single independent unit,
Mhm.
while supporting the intuition or the wisdom, intuition, uh, intuition, integrated into wisdom, supporting that intuition slash wisdom of the individual uniqueness somehow.
What comes to mind with what you're saying and what we're talking about is, so I don't know if this is right, but I'll just communicate the idea that knowledge is more this local thing. Whereas, like, so if wisdom has something to do with interplay of knowledge and experience, it's acting on knowledge in a system of agents that are all also doing the same with different states of knowledge. But wisdom is able to deal with a lot of uncertainty because you don't know what people know, and it's not a rational process of calculating what people know and predicting what they will do. There's just an, as you say, an awareness of, if I act on this knowledge in this way, it will tend to produce certain outcomes, and I can just tell that intuitively. It's when it comes to wisdom gets reduced to this form of intuition, it seems.
So the form of intuition that wisdom is reduced to when you're interconnected in some kind of a productive way that you can trust,
Mhm.
which I think is what you're saying. I mean, it wouldn't work in a situation where all of your awareness is false,
No, no,
right?
no. Sure.
So the wisdom that emerges from this interdependent situation that is based on trust and also proof, periodic proof that that trust is warranted, right?
Yeah, and
Is very
validation of
intuitive,
intuition, that your intuitions are right.
right?
There's a process of testing out and refining that needs to happen as well with one's intuition.
So this is this is exciting to me because it's very much like um, analytical versus intuitive thinking, or left brain, right brain.
Mm,
In that the best strategy is for those two kinds of thinking to work together. So if you're
absolutely.
dominated by one or the other, things don't work as well, right?
Mhm, mhm.
But the left and the right hemispheres of the cortex actually have massive uh, interdependence.
It's like
So,
corpus callosum, I think that.
corpus callosum, but also the anterior commissure, but also those are direct connections.
Mm,
But then, of course, each of the neurons, each of the circuits are listening into the magnetic fields
right.
that are
Yep.
being stimulated. You don't need a direct connection for that.
Yep. Yep.
And so if you've ever talked to anyone who had a stroke in one hemisphere or the other, largely, you can see how much it doesn't work to just have one going on.
Hmm.
And at the same time, you can begin to see during recovery the development of interdependence and agreement. I'm really good at this. You're really good at that. We need to have some kind of a relationship, and we have to work that out all over again.
Mm.
So I feel like my metaphor for Lace is the world is recovering from a stroke. We got to work it out all over again, but we want to work it out in a way that's full of love and wisdom.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah, and so there's another thought I had earlier I wanted to share, uh, that relates to that in my mind, and also like the role of game theory here, because game theory comes out of, you know, both economics and sort of very militaristic strategic planning, where there's very, you know, intense distrust between the players of the game or the agents in the system, and that doesn't lead often to good outcomes, particularly if the model you're using treats the agents as if they are, you know, purely self-interested uh, agents who will totally screw over everyone else if it leads to a better outcome for them. The more you treat people that way, the more they'll become that way. So the more policy is designed from that perspective, the more it creates societies that behave that way. And that's not, at least that's my perspective. And so this is just a pure question, and I don't mean this from a sort of mathematical standpoint. And I'm sure there's been work in this direction. I know there's a lot of work on cooperative games, and I haven't studied it. So I'm not actually, this is not coming from the mathematician hat or even the philosopher hat per se. It's more just an intuitive thing. But
you get to just have an opinion as a person.
yeah, well, that's so I will take that option. So rather than viewing self-interest as a thing that applies only to an individual agent, we think of, coming from a lot of spiritual traditions, there's a deeper understanding of self that transcends the individual, and you can understand the other as part of yourself. And sort of you can generalize that in whatever direction you like. From humanity point of view, we can understand humanity as part of a collective self of which we are a part. We can extend that to incorporate or include rather all of the animals on the planet. They're also this part of this broader extended self, plants, all sort of ecosystems, and beyond, right? So if we understand self-interest from that point of view, it looks very different, and it's not obvious how to analyze that mathematically, because there is no, again, like mathematics tends to favor linear assumptions, linearity assumptions, and independence assumptions because it leads.
It's simple.
What's also computable in
Yeah.
a way that nonlinear and interacting systems tend not to be. But part of the linearity in this case is this kind of self-interest that's specific to an individual, because again, that's something that's very easy to calculate. It's only this one node in a network that you need to focus on for maximizing utility, and then they're all competing to do the same thing. But so what if we understand self in this broader sense? And I think that's what really the whole project of decentralized governance is about, is figuring out how to solve that problem. And it seems clear with where things are going that thinking about things in terms of incentives and as a way of driving beneficial behavior at a collective level is going to be important for that. But maybe the way we think of game theory also needs to change in keeping with that. So incentive mechanisms aren't necessarily game theory proper. It's this sort of broader thing that we're developing into as we think about how to govern complex, dynamical collective systems.
Well, I think incentives are really important, but I also think, as you said earlier, if you treat people as if they're little input output machines, they will be little input output machines. And if you have the assumption of self-interest only and not awareness of interdependence, they'll behave in that way. And so I think we need something more than incentives. I think we need an expectation that I consider to be a loving expectation, an expectation that wisdom can be emergent, an expectation that people, if given the opportunity, can grow and flourish. Like we can actually water the seeds in the garden and expect that they will grow into different kinds of plants. Right? So when we get too tied to the sort of behavioral economics, game theory stuff that is sort of based on standing outside the system and saying, now, how do these little stupid creatures behave and how can we manipulate their behavior?
Yeah.
It's sort of an affront to the human soul. It's like not acknowledges, it doesn't acknowledge, it's not acknowledging the sort of developmental blueprint that unfolds when you have love. And so I want to kind of insert that in there and say, we can go past that. We can prepare for the mechanics of where many people are now, but we can also expect growth and prepare for that too, and feed love into the system and emergent wisdom, feed that back into the system to support that growth. Is that too idealistic?
I don't know. I don't. It's certainly not necessarily in my mind. I mean, I think so. I'm just trying to think of how I want to describe this. So at the level of which you intend that, I 100% agree. And I'm not coming at this because I disagree in any way. It's more a conflict of language, and I think part of some people might not like what you just said because of the very profound ambiguity in the term love. And part of the role of wisdom, I think, in this context is discovering the right meaning of love with sort of coming to these conversations with an open heart and an open mind. And then if you're not, it's not a case where you have a particular definition of love in mind, and then you can interpret what you say. You have to discover what is meant by love in this context, because it's one of those terms that can mean almost anything. You know what I mean? Like within limits, because there are certain things that are clearly not love, and so it excludes all of that. But within this sort of much broader range, it has this very diverse meaning. But also, so this gets to the interplay between the analytical and the intuitive mind. Is you can find in a sort of dynamic interplay precise ways of articulating things that anyone will be able to understand. You could build an analytical model of, if you wanted, that capture some aspect of what the intuitive meaning of love is. And then, but then where it misses, you go back to the intuitive side, you extend or adapt the analytical version to better match, and you require, eventually you sort of converge on something that's close enough, and then it can be acted upon by computational systems because it has this analytical representation.
That's
So
beautiful.
so
I mean,
yeah. So,
that's answers the question about how to get wisdom into the system.
mm, mm. And I think, well, I was going to take it off in a whole other discussion, but I'll avoid that right now, I think.
Are you sure? We
Well,
have like 10 more minutes. Whatever you want to talk about seems good to me.
well, it's just, yeah, I don't know if I want to open that sort of Pandora's box, as it were, right now.
All right, can you just name the box so we can talk about it later?
Well, it's essentially sort of forms of AI consciousness, or things that closer mimic conscious behavior in humans that are exhibited by machines. But I
Right.
don't feel like I'm in a position to enter into that discussion right now.
We'll have
So
another discussion about that. I am a fan of talking about that out loud. I think people are scared of it. I think it's fascinating that people are scared of it because we make babies all the time and they're conscious and we have no idea what they're going to do. So I don't get it. But anyway,
well, maybe just to share the feeling that I have is that it's possible to maybe I'll call this a hypothesis, that it's possible to create artificial intelligence systems that exhibit I don't know how, I'm struggling to find the words,
they
that
might be
mimic,
conscious and
well,
just like,
at the very least mimic intuition in some way, I
right. But
think.
as far as I know, you mimic intuition, right? Like I'm not
Right.
inside
No,
of you.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
So we can avoid the deeper questions of whether it's conscious or not, what we mean by that. That's part of
Right.
what I'm trying to dodge right now.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's so there's different definitions of consciousness. And what you're describing is behavioral consciousness, which you can detect from the outside behavior.
Right.
And then there's subjective consciousness, which is the actual experience of being conscious, which is
Yes.
not what you're talking about, but also is a super interesting question when it comes to AI.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No, of
Yeah.
course. But so the
So
hypothesis is that it's possible to develop systems that exhibit behavioral consciousness that learn and want to learn how to, you know, be good actors in a system of, you know, a collective of agents. And with good, you know, in the meaning of good, because good is another one of those words that can mean almost anything.
Well, it depends on the people who build them and how they're hooked up together, which is why I mean, honestly, the core developers at LightRoot, right, are going to help define that. I mean, you can't get away from protocols, the initial protocols that are developed. Those could change with time. But I don't think you can get away that the initial protocols ideally need to be developed by people who have an opinion about what is good.
Well, I think anybody will have an opinion about what is good, but
Right, right. But they have to have an opinion about what is good. And if it succeeds, it will be because that opinion is agreed with by multiple organizations.
right. And you know, larger and larger collectives as this thing evolves. So the more solid a place from a, I don't know, ethical standpoint that the notion of good has, the more likely it is to lead to a system that is compatible with the expectations of, you know, these larger and larger collectives.
Yeah, there's a part of me that thinks that interdependence itself is a pretty reasonable definition of good.
Maybe. I mean, you can have sort of codependent relationships, which are highly interdependent, but are not necessarily good.
Oh, so by interdependence, I guess I should define that. I mean, you have two entities, Alice and Bob, and Alice both knows that she is absolutely supported and sometimes hurt by Bob. There's a relationship there. She knows there's a relationship there, but she also knows that she can be independent of Bob. In other words, she doesn't have to be with Bob. She can be with someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So interdependence is both awareness of interaction or dependency and independence.
So it's sort of chosen relationship or something like that.
The awareness that, yeah, the awareness that a relationship does not have to be, and another relationship could be instead,
Mm-hmm.
but there
Mm-hmm.
has to be a relationship,
Mm-hmm.
multiple relationships, right? And that, to me, that strikes me as similar to what we're building, because each node could potentially, right, choose with whom to interact. But to be functional, most of them have to want to interact with whichever nodes have high enough reputation to do the task they're being asked to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess my mind is now moving into something else I feel like is really important to talk about, but we don't have much time to get into.
Well, go for it. Let's do it quick.
Because I think a lot of the concerns people have is that there's going to be this sort of runaway behavior, like negative behavior that will happen. And part of that comes from, I think, the, you know, the independent version of game theory or game theoretic mechanics, where systems that is a natural outcome in some sense, because you have individual nodes that are maximizing their own individual self-interest. So I want to explore that more, because I don't have, you know, well thought out thoughts on any of these issues, but I have distinct feelings that there are ways to address these problems and like the deep concerns that people have. And but one thought that's coming up right now is that part of the whole design of a decentralized AI system is it's distributed by nature and therefore interdependent by nature. And you have the kind of relationship that you're pointing to that, I will transact with you as long as you can prove to me that, you're a reputable node to transact with. But if you turn out not to be, I can go transact with somebody else. So you have that element. But you also have potentially, like with the way that AGI can potentially evolve out of a collective system like this, because the higher order intelligence that emerges out of the network is not localized. It's this manifestation or emergent property of the collective behavior of many individual agents. It doesn't have this same capacity because, like, the profit maximizations at the node level exist at the node level, not at the collective level. So there's, a fallacy of composition comes to mind. Like, it doesn't necessarily translate to this higher order thing. Whether that applies or not, I don't know. I'm just, yeah.
But
So,
doesn't that depend on how thoughtfully these interactions are constructed?
well, uh, it's hard to talk about without an understanding of how this higher order intelligence will manifest and how it can exhibit forms of agency on its own. The idea is to place this under decentralized governance so that the higher order effects are like the outcomes are something that human beings have a say in, and it's everybody participating in the network that has an equal say about what will happen with that, as opposed to the sort of more limited forms of decentralization we have right now, where there's sort of convergence of power around small numbers of nodes. This is another
Right.
thing that Toda IP allows in this context. The preservation of that ability to really distribute power over all of the participants.
True decentralization.
As close as you can get to it. Yeah.
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 So I know we're about to leave. We'll have to have another conversation, but um, it does make me think of, again, the way the brain works and the way the brain interfaces with consciousness. And I won't
Mm-hmm.
say produces consciousness, because I think there's a legitimate model where the brain acts more like a radio to receive consciousness that already exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think we can learn from all of the checks and balances in the brain in terms of how we think about building the interdependence.
Mm. Yeah.
So
I'm interested to hear more of your thoughts on that.
yeah, and I want to hear more of your thoughts on how to think about wisdom and love, truth and awareness,
Mm.
intuition, and
Mm.
how we weave that in. So, okay, Robert, we should stop. I've done
Okay.
a lot of sweating, so maybe this has helped my cold, probably.
That's good. I'm glad.
And I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah. Likewise. This was fun.
Yeah, cool. All right, I'll end the recording here. Let's see, how do I do that? I have a lot of buttons. Oh,
Oops.